December 1945. Mohammed shovel strikes something hard near Nag Hammadi, Egypt. He's digging for fertilizer, never imagining he's about to uncover 13 leather-bound codices that would forever change what we know about early Christianity. In a moment of tragic irony, his mother burns some of these priceless manuscripts for cooking fuel, long before scholars realize what they truly are. What emerged from that desert cliff were 52 texts, many completely unknown to modern scholarship. These weren't writings from outsiders looking in. They were the voices of early Christians, who claimed direct knowledge of Christ's teachings, yet their vision was so radically different from what became Orthodox Christianity that it had to be quite literally buried. Here's what stopped me cold. These texts speak of 12 distinct universes that Christ revealed to his closest disciples, not metaphorical realms, but actual cosmological realities that fundamentally reshape how we understand existence itself. The question that haunts every page, what, the Christ we've inherited, is just a fragment of something infinitely larger? What if the real teachings were hidden for a reason? Picture this. For the first 3 centuries after that discovery in the Egyptian desert we explored earlier, Christianity wasn't the monolithic institution we know today. It was a vibrant, chaotic marketplace of ideas, where dozens of different communities claimed to follow Christ's true teachings. Some worshipped in grand basilicas, others in secret underground chambers. Some believed in resurrection of the flesh, others in the liberation of consciousness itself. The Gnostics, literally meaning those who know, weren't some fringe cult operating in the shadows. They were sophisticated philosophers, mystics, and teachers who saw something radically different in Christ's message. While emerging Orthodox Christianity preached that Jesus died for humanity's sins, the Gnostics taught that Christ came as a cosmic revealer, a divine messenger, whose purpose was to awaken the sleeping God within every human being. This wasn't just a theological disagreement. This was a completely different understanding of what it means to be human. The Gnostic communities believed that buried deep within your consciousness lies a divine spark, a fragment of the eternal source that somehow became trapped in the dense matter of this physical world. Think about the implications of that for a moment. You're not a sinner begging for salvation from an external deity. You're literally a piece of divinity temporarily experiencing limitation, waiting to remember your true nature. The Gospel of Thomas, one of those leather-bound texts discovered in 1945, records Jesus saying, "If you bring forth what is within you, what you have will save you. If you do not have that within you, what you do not have within you will kill you." This isn't about following rules or believing the right doctrines. This is about awakening to the God consciousness already present within your own being. Compare this empowering vision to what was happening in the emerging Orthodox Church. By the 2nd and 3rd centuries, a rigid hierarchy was crystallizing. Bishops claimed exclusive authority to interpret scripture. Elaborate rituals replaced direct spiritual experience. The message shifted from awaken to your divine nature, to obey the church authorities who will mediate your salvation. The Gnostic communities operated completely differently. In many of their gatherings, women served as priests, prophets, and spiritual teachers. The Gospel of Mary reveals Mary Magdalene receiving special teachings from Christ and instructing the male disciples. The Gospel of Philip describes her as the companion of the Savior, who understood mysteries that others couldn't grasp. These communities emphasized direct personal revelation over institutional authority. They practiced sophisticated meditation techniques, studied the hidden meanings behind biblical stories, and developed elaborate cosmologies, explaining how consciousness descended into matter and how it could return to its source. But here's where the story takes a dark turn. When Emperor Constantine converted to Christianity in the early 4th century, everything changed. Suddenly, religious diversity became a political problem. The Council of Nicaea in 35 CE wasn't just a theological gathering. It was a power consolidation. Church leaders backed by imperial authority didn't simply choose which books belonged in the Bible. They systematically eliminated competing versions of Christianity. Consider how different our world might be if this tradition had survived intact. Instead of waiting for salvation from external sources, millions of people might have grown up understanding their own divine nature. Instead of rigid religious hierarchies, we might have developed communities focused on direct spiritual experience and mystical development. The Valentinian Gnostics, one of the most sophisticated schools, taught that the material world emerged from a cosmic disruption, a divine emanation that fell into forgetfulness and created physical reality as a kind of dream state. Your individual awakening isn't just personal salvation, it's participating in the universe's return to conscious unity. These weren't abstract philosophical concepts. Gnostic communities developed practical techniques for what they called ascent of the soul, systematic methods for expanding consciousness beyond ordinary perception. They understood that gnosis, true spiritual knowledge, comes through direct experience rather than intellectual belief. What we're about to explore in the coming sections isn't just ancient history. These buried texts contain a blueprint for understanding reality itself, a cosmology that might revolutionize how we think about consciousness, dimensions, and the very nature of existence. The monks who risked everything to preserve these teachings understood something crucial. Some knowledge is too important to let die, even if it must sleep in the desert for 16 centuries, waiting for the right moment to emerge again. The Gnostic revolution failed politically, but its spiritual insights remain as relevant today as they were 2,000 years ago, perhaps more so. Among all the texts discovered in that desert cave, none challenges everything we thought we knew about Christianity quite like the Gospel of Thomas. When scholars first translated these fragmented papyrus pages, they realized they were holding something that completely rewrote the narrative of Christ's teachings. Here's what makes Thomas so revolutionary. It contains no birth story, no miracles, no crucifixion, and no resurrection. Instead, what we find are 114 sayings that read like an ancient manual for consciousness transformation. This isn't the Jesus of Sunday school. This is Jesus as a master teacher, revealing the deepest secrets of human awakening. The opening line sets the tone immediately. These are the secret sayings which the living Jesus spoke. Notice that word living, not the risen Jesus, not the crucified Jesus, but the living Jesus speaking directly to those ready to hear. And what he reveals fundamentally challenges 2,000 years of orthodox teaching. Consider saying number 3, perhaps the most paradigm-shattering passage in all of early Christian literature. The kingdom of heaven is inside you and outside you. When you know yourselves, then you will be known, and you will realize that you are the children of the living Father. Think about what this actually means. Traditional Christianity teaches that salvation comes from outside through Christ's sacrifice, through church sacraments, through divine grace bestowed upon the worthy. But Thomas presents Jesus teaching something completely different. The kingdom isn't a place you go to after death, and it's not something granted by external authority. It's a state of consciousness you access by knowing yourself. This single saying demolishes the entire foundation of institutional Christianity. If the kingdom is already within you, what do you need a church for? If knowing yourself makes you a child of the living Father, why do you need a priest as intermediary? You can see why these texts were buried. But Thomas goes even deeper. Saying 22 describes making the two into one, integrating the masculine and feminine, the inner and outer, the above and below. This isn't abstract philosophy. It's practical instruction for psychological wholeness. Modern psychology calls this individuation, the integration of our conscious and unconscious aspects. 2,000 years ago, Jesus was apparently teaching the same process. What's fascinating is how Thomas presents Jesus not as an object of worship, but as someone showing others how to achieve the same state of awakening. In saying 10:1 oath, Jesus says, "Whoever drinks from my mouth will become as I am, and I myself will become that person, and the hidden things will be revealed to that person." Read that again. Jesus isn't saying worship me or believe in me for salvation. He's saying become as I am. This suggests that Christ consciousness isn't unique to one historical figure. It's a state of awareness available to anyone willing to do the inner work. This completely inverts Orthodox Christianity. Instead of Jesus being the unique Son of God who died for our sins, Thomas presents him as the first among equals, showing others the path to their own divine nature. The implications are staggering. The format itself is significant. These secret sayings aren't meant for mass consumption. They're designed to reveal deeper meanings as your consciousness expands. Saying 77 demonstrates this perfectly. I am the light that is over all things. I am all. From me all came forth, and to me all attained. Split a piece of wood. I am there. Lift up the stone and you will find me there. On the surface, this might sound like Jesus claiming to be God, but look deeper. He's describing the fundamental unity of consciousness, the recognition that the same awareness looking through your eyes is the same awareness expressing through all existence. This isn't megalomania, it's enlightenment. Modern neuroscience is beginning to understand what these ancient texts were pointing toward. Consciousness isn't produced by the brain, it's the fundamental fabric of reality itself. When you truly know yourself, you discover that your essential nature is identical to the source of all existence. You don't become God, you recognize that you never were separate from God. Thomas also contains some of the most practical psychological insights ever recorded. Saying 70 states, if you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you. This is shadow work, described with startling precision. The recognition that our unintegrated aspects will either be consciously expressed or unconsciously projected. The text repeatedly emphasizes direct experience over belief. Saying 11:13 has the disciples asking, when the kingdom will come, and Jesus responds, it will not come, by watching for it. It will not be said, look here, or look there. Rather, the Father's kingdom is spread out upon the earth, and people do not see it. This isn't about waiting for some future apocalypse or heavenly reward. The kingdom is here now, but it requires a shift in perception to recognize it. It's the difference between believing in transformation and actually experiencing it. You can understand why church authorities found these teachings so dangerous. Orthodox Christianity maintains control through the promise of future salvation, earned through current obedience. But if salvation is recognizing what you already are, if the kingdom is accessible through direct inner work, then external religious authority becomes unnecessary. Thomas presents a path of spiritual sovereignty, not rebellion against the divine, but recognition of your inherent divine nature. It's the ultimate democratization of enlightenment, suggesting that every human being carries the same potential for awakening that Jesus demonstrated. These weren't just abstract teaching, they were practical instructions for consciousness transformation that challenged the very foundations of religious control. And as we'll discover, this was just the beginning of what the Nag Hammadi texts revealed about the true nature of reality and our place within it. Hidden within the scattered fragments of the Gospel of Philip lies perhaps the most radical reimagining of spiritual transformation ever committed to paper. Unlike the systematic theology we've come to expect from religious texts, Philip reads like the personal notebook of a mystic, part philosophical dialogue, part meditation on sacred mysteries, part practical manual for inner alchemy. This fragmented structure isn't accidental. It mirrors the very nature of awakening itself. Sudden flashes of insight, profound realizations that can't be forced into neat theological category. Where Thomas gave us Christ's secret sayings about finding the kingdom within, Philip takes us deeper into the mechanics of how that transformation actually happened. And at the heart of his teaching lies a concept that would make traditional Christianity blush: the bridal chamber, the ultimate sacrament, where the divided soul reunites with itself. But before we dive into that mystery, we need to understand how Philip completely revolutionizes our understanding of the sacraments themselves. Forget everything you think you know about baptism, communion, and confirmation as rituals performed by priests in stone buildings. Philip presents these as inner transformations, psychological and spiritual processes that happen within consciousness itself. The sacraments of this aeon are defective, Philip declares with startling directness. He's not talking about improving church ceremonies. He's saying that external rituals, no matter how beautifully performed, miss the entire point. The real baptism isn't water touching skin, it's consciousness awakening to its true nature. The real communion isn't bread and wine, it's the soul recognizing its unity with divine wisdom. This brings us to one of Philip's most profound insights. Truth did not come into the world naked, but it came in types and images. The world will not receive truth in any other way. Think about what he's really saying here. Every spiritual teaching, every religious symbol, every sacred story is necessarily a metaphor. Not because the truth isn't real, but because ultimate reality is so far beyond ordinary thinking that it can only be approached through symbols and images. This is why the Gnostics were so comfortable with what seemed like contradictions to their orthodox critics. They understood that spiritual language operates like poetry, not like legal contracts. When Philip talks about the bridal chamber, he's not describing a physical space, or even a specific ritual. He's pointing toward a psychological reality that can only be hinted at through the metaphor of sacred marriage. And this is where things get really interesting. Philip consistently presents Mary Magdalene not as a repentant sinner, or even just a devoted follower, but as the companion of Jesus, a term loaded with theological significance. The text describes how Jesus loved her more than all the disciples, and used to kiss her, often on her mouth. Before you dismiss this as scandalous gossip, consider what Philip is actually teaching. The relationship between Jesus and Mary Magdalene represents the sacred marriage principle playing out in human form. It's not about romantic love in any ordinary sense. It's about the union of complementary aspects of consciousness, what we might call the integration of masculine and feminine principles within the psyche. Jesus represents the active, penetrating aspect of divine wisdom. Mary Magdalene embodies the receptive, nurturing aspect that receives and gives birth to spiritual understanding. This sacred marriage isn't something that happened once in history between two people. It's the pattern for every soul's journey toward wholeness. Philip is teaching us that spiritual awakening requires the integration of opposites within consciousness, not their separation into hierarchical relationships, where one dominates the other. But Philip goes even further in challenging conventional Christian thinking. He presents resurrection not as something that might happen to you after death if you believe the right things, but as a present possibility available right now. Those who say they will die first and then rise are in error. He states bluntly, if they do not first receive the resurrection while they live, when they die they will receive nothing. This isn't metaphorical language. It's practical psychology. Philip is describing what modern depth psychology would call individuation, the process by which a person integrates the unconscious contents of their psyche and becomes whole. The resurrection is awakening from the sleep of unconscious identification with thoughts, emotions, and social conditioning. The text speaks repeatedly of garments of light that the soul must put on to enter higher dimensions of reality. These aren't literal clothing items you receive in some celestial crisis wardrobe. They're states of consciousness, levels of awareness that allow you to perceive reality from increasingly integrated perspective. Each garment represents another layer of illusion dissolved, another aspect of your authentic nature reclaimed. Philip's practical guidance becomes most clear when he discusses the stages of this inner marriage. First comes recognition, seeing through the false divisions that separate you from your own wholeness. Then comes preparation, the patient work of integrating shadow aspects of personality that you've rejected or denied. Finally comes union, the moment when the seeking self dissolves into the found self, when the questioner and the answer merge into living wisdom. What makes this teaching so powerful is how it addresses the fundamental human experience of feeling divided against ourselves. We all know what it's like to have our rational mind pulling in one direction while our emotions pull in another. We've all experienced the conflict between what we think we should do and what we actually want to do. Philip is teaching that this inner division isn't a moral failing. It's the starting point for spiritual transformation. The bridal chamber becomes the space within consciousness where these apparent opposites can meet and discover they were never really separate. It's where knowledge and wisdom embrace, where spirit and matter recognize their unity, where the masculine and feminine aspects of psyche stop fighting and start dancing together. Modern psychology has given us terms like cognitive integration and emotional regulation. But Philip was describing these same processes in the language of sacred marriage. 1,500 years before Freud was born, he understood that psychological wholeness isn't achieved through dominance of one aspect over another, but through the loving integration of all aspects into a unified field of awareness. This is why Philip's Gospel reads like a manual for inner transformation, rather than a theological treatise. Every passage points toward practical ways of recognizing and healing the divisions within consciousness. Every symbol opens up new possibilities for understanding how awakening actually works. The Gospel of Philip doesn't just challenge traditional Christianity, it offers a roadmap for the kind of psychological and spiritual integration that our fragmented world desperately needs. It shows us that the sacred marriage isn't something to believe in, but something to experience, and that experience is available right now in this moment, to anyone willing to embrace the mystery of their own wholeness. If you thought the Gospel of Thomas challenged everything you knew about Christ's teachings, and Philip opened your eyes to the mysteries of sacred union, then the secret book of John is about to completely shatter your understanding of reality itself. This isn't just another alternative gospel, it's a cosmic revelation that turns the entire story of creation upside down. Picture this: everything you've been taught about God, creation, and the nature of existence is backwards. The world isn't the loving creation of a benevolent deity. It's a prison constructed by a deluded impostor who genuinely believes he's the supreme God. That's the earth-shattering premise of the secret book of John. And once you grasp its implications, you'll never look at spiritual authority the same way again. The text begins not with our familiar material world, but in the pleroma, a realm of pure divine light that exists beyond all human comprehension. Think of it as the true spiritual universe, where divine consciousness expresses itself through pairs of complementary emanations called aeons. These aren't separate gods, but aspects of one infinite awareness experiencing itself in perfect harmony. Christ exists here as pure divine mind alongside emanations representing concepts like truth, life, and incorruptibility. But here's where the story takes its dramatic turn. One of these divine emanations, Sophia, whose name literally means wisdom, becomes consumed with desire to create something new. Unlike the other aeons who create in perfect partnership, Sophia attempts to generate something entirely on her own, without her divine counterpart. The result is catastrophic. Her solo creative act produces an offspring so alien to the divine realm that it's immediately cast out from the pleroma. This entity, known as the demiurge, emerges blind to his true origins and convinced of his own supremacy. In his ignorance and arrogance, he declares, "I am God, and there is no other." Sound familiar? That's because this figure becomes the creator deity of the Old Testament, the jealous, wrathful God who demands exclusive worship and punishes disobedience. The demiurge then constructs our material universe. But here's the crucial point. He's working from a flawed template. Having never experienced the true divine realm, he creates a counterfeit reality, a shadow world that mimics certain aspects of divine creation, while remaining fundamentally disconnected from its source. It's like someone trying to paint the Sistine Chapel after only seeing a blurry photograph. This cosmology explains something that traditional theology struggles with. Why does a world supposedly created by perfect love contain so much suffering, ignorance, and evil? According to John's revelation, it's because we're not living in God's true creation at all. We're trapped in a simulation run by a deluded administrator who thinks he's running the real program. But the plot thickens when the plotting demiurge creates humanity. He unknowingly incorporates something he can't control. Sparks of divine light that fell from Sophia during her creative mishap. These sparks become trapped within human consciousness, creating beings who carry the potential for divine awakening, even while imprisoned in material bodies. We're like gods with amnesia, carrying infinite potential while convinced we're merely biological machines destined for death. The demiurge recognizes this threat instinctively, along with his archonic helpers. Think of them as cosmic prison guards. He constructs elaborate systems to keep humanity unconscious of its divine heritage. These aren't just physical constraints, but psychological and spiritual ones. The archons work through religious institutions, political systems, and cultural conditioning to maintain what the text calls forgetfulness, a state where humans remain unaware of their true divine nature. This is where Christ's mission becomes revolutionary. In John's breathtaking account, Christ doesn't come to die for humanity's sins. He comes as a divine emissary, sent from the true God realm, to provide gnosis, the awakening knowledge that can free consciousness from its archonic prison. His crucifixion isn't a sacrifice to appease divine wrath, but a demonstration that even the demiurge's ultimate weapon, death itself, cannot destroy divine consciousness. The psychological sophistication here is remarkable. The text describes multiple levels of consciousness, from the densest material awareness, up through various degrees of spiritual awakening. It's like a detailed map of human development that anticipates modern psychology by nearly 2 millennia. Carl Jung later recognized these Gnostic insights as profound descriptions of what he called individuation, the process by which consciousness integrates its shadow aspects and realizes its full potential. But perhaps the most radical implication concerns authority itself. If the world's creator is a deluded impostor, then worldly religious and political authorities derive their power from a fundamentally illegitimate source. True spirituality doesn't require submission to external authority. It demands awakening to the divine authority within your own consciousness. You can imagine why Orthodox Christianity considered this the ultimate heresy. The secret book of John doesn't just offer an alternative interpretation of Scripture. It suggests that the entire religious establishment serves the wrong God. Instead of encouraging obedience to ecclesiastical hierarchy, it calls for spiritual rebellion against all forms of consciousness control. The text's influence on later esoteric traditions is profound. Medieval alchemists encoded similar cosmological principles in their symbolic language. Renaissance Hermeticists drew directly from Gnostic sources. Modern depth psychology, quantum physics theories about multiple dimensions, and even certain interpretations of simulation theory echo themes first articulated in John's cosmic vision. Consider how this ancient text anticipated contemporary questions about the nature of reality. When physicists discuss parallel dimensions or philosophers debate whether we might be living in a sophisticated simulation, they're grappling with questions the Gnostics explored centuries ago. The idea that our perceived reality might be a kind of cosmic virtual reality administered by entities with their own agenda doesn't sound quite so far-fetched in our digital age. The secret book of John offers something rarely found in religious literature, a cosmology that accounts for both human suffering and human potential, without requiring us to accept either as permanent conditions. We suffer because we're trapped in a counterfeit creation, but we carry within ourselves the means of escape. Liberation isn't about earning divine favor, it's about remembering who we really are. The question this text poses to every reader is profound. If your spiritual awakening requires not submission, but rebellion, not faith but knowledge, not salvation but remembrance, are you ready to see just how deep this cosmic deception goes? When you dig into the Nag Hammadi texts, one figure emerges from the shadows with startling clarity: Mary Magdalene. But this isn't the repentant prostitute that Orthodox Christianity has painted for nearly 2,000 years. The woman we encounter in these ancient manuscripts is something far more revolutionary. Jesus' most advanced student, his spiritual equal, and the embodiment of divine wisdom itself. The contrast is jarring. Traditional Christianity reduced Mary to a reformed sinner, weeping at Jesus' feet. Yet in the Gospel of Mary, discovered at Nag Hammadi, she's the one receiving profound visions that leave the male disciples scratching their heads in confusion. She's not seeking forgiveness. She's dispensing wisdom that transcends their understanding entirely. Consider this remarkable scene from the Gospel of Mary. After Jesus departs, the disciples are distraught, uncertain about continuing his mission. It's Mary who steps forward to comfort them, saying, "Do not weep and do not grieve, nor be irresolute, for his grace will be entirely with you and will protect you." When Peter asks her to share the teachings Jesus gave her privately, she reveals an extraordinary vision about the soul's journey through hostile cosmic powers. But here's where it gets fascinating and revealing about early church politics. Peter's response drips with jealousy and wounded masculine pride. Did he really speak privately with a woman and not openly to us? Are we to turn about and all listen to her? Did he prefer her to us? This isn't theological disagreement. It's patriarchal panic at feminine spiritual authority. The Gospel of Philip pushes this even further. describing Mary as the one whom the Savior loved more than all the disciples. It speaks of Jesus kissing her often, which caused the other disciples to question why he loved her more than them. But we're not talking about romantic love here. This is sacred union, the marriage of human consciousness with divine gnosis that we explored in the previous section on sacred marriage. Mary represents something that threatened the emerging church hierarchy. To its core, the divine feminine principle, known as Sophia, wisdom and Gnostic understanding. Spiritual awakening requires integrating both masculine and feminine divine principles. Mary embodies this feminine wisdom that must unite with the masculine Christ principle for complete realization. Her relationship with Jesus symbolizes this cosmic marriage within each of us. The teachings attributed to Mary in these texts are sophisticated beyond anything we'd expect from orthodox portrayals. She describes sin not as moral transgression, but as a fundamental misunderstanding of our true nature. There is no sin, but it is you who make sin when you do the things that are like the nature of adultery, which is called sin. She's pointing to the same cosmic deception we saw in the secret book of John, our identification with this false material reality. Mary's vision of the soul's ascent is particularly striking. She describes how the soul must pass through 4 powers that try to trap it: darkness, desire, ignorance, and wrath of death. Each represents attachments that keep us bound to material existence. But the awakened soul recognizes these powers have no real authority. I recognized you not. I served as a garment binding you, and you did not recognize me. The soul realizes these hostile forces only have power when we're unconscious of our true divine nature. This teaching connects directly to what we've been exploring throughout these texts. The theme of awakening from cosmic deception. Mary's insights about the soul's journey mirror the broader Gnostic understanding that we're divine beings trapped in a false reality, needing to remember our true nature to return home. The suppression of Mary's voice wasn't accidental, it was systematic. As Christianity became institutionalized, feminine spiritual authority became increasingly threatening to patriarchal church structures. The transformation of Mary from wisdom teacher to repentant sinner represents one of history's most successful character assassinations. It removed the divine feminine from Christianity's foundation, creating a spiritually unbalanced tradition. But Mary's symbolic significance runs even deeper. In Gnostic understanding, she represents the human soul itself in its relationship to divine wisdom. Her love for Jesus symbolizes the soul's longing for reunion with its divine source. Their union represents what happens when human consciousness awakens to its true nature, not through external authority or institutional mediation, but through direct gnosis, direct knowing. This is why recovering Mary's authentic voice matters beyond historical curiosity. She embodies a completely different model of spiritual development, one based on inner authority, direct revelation, and the integration of feminine wisdom. Her teachings suggest that awakening isn't about following external rules or believing correct doctrines, but about recognizing the divine nature that's already within us. The Gospel of Mary presents a stunning reversal. While the male disciples argue about authority and succession, Mary simply shares wisdom from her direct experience of the divine. She doesn't claim institutional power. She demonstrates spiritual authority through understanding. This threatens every hierarchical religious structure, because it suggests divine wisdom is accessible to anyone willing to look within. Mary's prominence in multiple Nag Hammadi texts reveals something profound about early Christianity's diversity. Before orthodoxy crystallized, there were communities that recognized feminine spiritual authority, that saw the divine as both masculine and feminine, that understood awakening as the integration of these complementary principles, rather than the dominance of one over the other. When we restore Mary's authentic voice, we're not just correcting historical injustice, we're recovering an essential piece of human spiritual development. The divine feminine principle she represents isn't about gender politics, it's about the wisdom, intuition, and nurturing qualities necessary for complete spiritual maturation. Without this integration, spirituality becomes unbalanced, authoritarian, disconnected from the very wisdom it claims to seek. Mary Magdalene emerges from these ancient texts as a master teacher whose insights into consciousness, reality, and spiritual liberation rival anything in the Orthodox tradition. Her suppression represents the broader suppression of humanity's complete spiritual potential, the marriage of wisdom and love, understanding and compassion, that these Gnostic texts present as our true destiny. Picture Christ rising from the dead, not to comfort his disciples with familiar platitudes, but to shatter their understanding of reality itself. This is exactly what we encounter in the Sophia of Jesus Christ, perhaps the most cosmologically ambitious dialogue in the entire Nag Hammadi collection. Unlike the secret book of John's cosmic rebellion narrative, or Mary Magdalene's intimate wisdom teachings, this text presents us with something unprecedented, a systematic map of 12 forgotten universes that exist beyond our physical reality. The format itself is revolutionary. This isn't Christ speaking to crowds, or even to his inner circle during his earthly ministry. This is the risen Christ, having transcended death and gained access to the highest mysteries, meeting with his most trusted disciples, including Philip, Matthew, Thomas, Bartholomew, and yes, Mary Magdalene. The setting is Mount Galilee, but the conversation quickly moves far beyond any earthly location, as Christ begins to describe the true architecture of existence. Now, before we dive into these 12 universes, we need to understand why the number 12 held such profound significance in ancient cosmology. This wasn't arbitrary mystical symbolism. 12 represented cosmic completeness, the 12 zodiacal houses through which consciousness moves, the 12 tribes representing different aspects of human spiritual development, the 12 disciples, embodying distinct pathways to divine understanding. In the Sophia of Jesus Christ, 12 universes represent the complete spectrum of reality, through which every soul must journey in its return to the divine source. But here's where this text becomes truly extraordinary. These aren't physical galaxies, or alternate dimensions in the science fiction sense. These are levels of consciousness, dimensions of awareness that exist simultaneously, interpenetrating our reality right now. Each universe represents a different frequency of perception, a distinct way of experiencing existence that souls encounter as they ascend back to their divine origin. Christ explains to his disciples that what they perceive as the physical world is actually just the densest, most limited of these 12 universes. It's like being in the basement of a 12-story building and thinking that's all that exists. The text describes how most humans live their entire lives in just the first few universes, never realizing the vast expanses of reality available to their consciousness. Each universe, according to this dialogue, is governed by different cosmic powers, not necessarily malevolent like the archons we discussed in the secret book of John, but entities that represent different aspects of divine consciousness. These rulers present specific challenges and illusions that souls must navigate. In the lower universes, the illusions are gross, material obsessions with physical pleasure, power, and survival. But as consciousness ascends, the illusions become increasingly subtle. The text provides fascinating details about these ascending levels. In the third universe, souls encounter the illusion of intellectual superiority, believing that mental knowledge alone constitutes spiritual advancement. By the seventh universe, the challenge becomes the illusion of individual enlightenment, thinking you've reached the pinnacle when you've only achieved personal liberation, while remaining disconnected from universal compassion. What makes this cosmology so remarkable is how it parallels other ancient wisdom traditions that developed independently. The Kabbalistic tree of life describes 10 sephirot, or emanations of divine consciousness, each representing a different level of reality. Hindu cosmology speaks of 14 lokas or worlds, 7 ascending and 7 descending through which consciousness moves. Buddhist teachings describe multiple jhana states and bardos, intermediate states between death and rebirth, that correspond to different levels of awareness. But the Sophia of Jesus Christ goes further than these parallel traditions. By providing specific guidance for navigating each universal level, Christ explains that each universe requires different knowledge, different qualities of consciousness, to transcend. The lower universes demand the development of virtue and the purification of desire. The middle universes require the cultivation of wisdom and compassion. The highest universes can only be accessed through what the text calls unknowing knowing, state of consciousness beyond conceptual understanding. Here's where this ancient text becomes startlingly relevant to our modern understanding of reality. Quantum physics has discovered that consciousness plays a fundamental role in determining physical reality. The observer effect demonstrates that the act of observation actually influences what manifests at the quantum level. Parallel universe theories in cosmology suggest that multiple realities exist simultaneously, separated not by distance, but by frequency or dimensional barriers. The Sophia of Jesus Christ anticipated these discoveries by 2,000 years, describing reality as fundamentally consciousness-based rather than material-based. These 12 universes aren't out there somewhere. They're different ways of perceiving and interacting with the same underlying divine reality. The practical implications are staggering. If reality is structured in 12 interpenetrating levels of consciousness, then spiritual development isn't about believing the right doctrines or performing the right rituals. It's about learning to perceive and navigate these different dimensions of existence. It's about expanding your awareness beyond the limited frequency band that most humans mistake for total reality. Christ in this dialogue serves as the ultimate guide, the one consciousness that has mastered all 12 universes and can teach others the path of ascension. He's not offering salvation through faith alone, but providing a detailed roadmap for consciousness evolution. This transforms our understanding of both the cosmos and human potential in the most radical way possible. The question that emerges from this text isn't whether you believe in 12 universes, but whether you're ready to expand your perception beyond the narrow bandwidth you've been programmed to accept as reality. The Sophia of Jesus Christ suggests that every human consciousness has the potential to navigate these cosmic dimensions, but only if we're willing to release our attachment to the familiar limitations of ordinary awareness. What if I told you that mystics writing nearly 2,000 years ago described the fundamental structure of reality with an accuracy that would make modern physicists do a double take? After diving deep into the cosmological revelations we explored in the Sophia of Jesus Christ, something extraordinary becomes clear. These ancient Gnostic texts weren't just spiritual poetry. They were precise maps of a multidimensional universe that science is only now beginning to understand. The Gnostics described reality as layered, multidimensional, and far more complex than ordinary perception reveals. They spoke of multiple realms existing simultaneously, interpenetrating each other, like nested Russian dolls. Sound familiar? Today's theoretical physicists propose string theory, with its 11 dimensions, parallel universes branching infinitely through quantum mechanics, and hidden dimensions curled up so small we can't detect them with our instruments. But here's where it gets really interesting. The Gnostic texts describe something they called the pleroma, literally meaning fullness, a realm of infinite potential from which all realities emerge. This isn't empty space, it's pregnant with every possibility, vibrating with creative potential. Modern quantum field theory tells us that what we think of as empty vacuum is actually seething with virtual particles, zero-point energy fluctuations, and underlying quantum fields that give rise to all matter and energy. The quantum vacuum isn't empty, it's full of infinite potential energy, just like the ancient pleroma. Consider this passage from the Gospel of Philip. Those who say they will die first and then rise are in error. If they do not first receive the resurrection while they live, when they die they will receive nothing. This isn't just talking about spiritual resurrection. It's describing consciousness as the fundamental ground of being, something that must be activated while we're alive to experience the deeper layers of reality. This aligns remarkably with emerging theories in quantum mechanics about the role of consciousness in collapsing wave functions and literally creating the reality we experience through observation. The Copenhagen interpretation suggests that quantum systems exist in superposition until conscious observation forces them into definite states. The Gnostics were saying something similar. Consciousness doesn't just observe reality, it participates in creating it. The Gospel of Thomas contains this cryptic saying, "If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you." This sounds like ancient mysticism, but it perfectly describes how quantum fields work. Information and consciousness aren't separate from physical reality. They're the very foundation of it. What we think of as solid matter is actually crystallized information, patterns of energy, organized by consciousness. Digital physics and information theory are now suggesting that reality itself might be computational, that what we experience as the physical universe is actually information processing at the most fundamental level. The Gnostics taught that matter is crystallized consciousness, that the physical world emerges from divine thought, made manifest. They understood something we're just rediscovering. The universe is more like a mind than a machine. Now, let's talk about what the Gnostics called the archons, rulers governing different levels of reality. Modern psychology recognizes these as psychological complexes, unconscious patterns that govern our behavior. Social scientists study systemic control mechanisms that operate through institutions, media, and cultural conditioning. The Gnostics weren't paranoid. They were describing real forces that shape human consciousness and limit our perception of what's possible. They mapped these influences across multiple dimensions of existence. Just as we now understand that human behavior is influenced by biological drives, psychological conditioning, social systems, and cultural programming, the Gnostics identified specific entities or forces operating at each level of reality. They weren't superstitious. They were phenomenologists, carefully mapping the architecture of consciousness and the forces that influence it. The Gnostic texts describe the soul's journey through different dimensions with remarkable precision. Sophia details specific stages of consciousness expansion, describing how awareness moves through increasingly subtle realms. Modern research on consciousness, near-death experiences, and altered states is documenting similar phenomena. People report consistent experiences of moving through different levels of reality, encountering beings of light, and accessing information that seems to come from beyond ordinary consciousness. Dr. Rick Strassman's DMT research, studies of psychedelic therapy, and investigations into mystical experiences are revealing that consciousness can indeed access what appear to be other dimensions of reality. The Gnostics provided detailed maps of these territories long before we had the scientific framework to understand them. What's most remarkable is how Gnostic emphasis on direct knowledge, gnosis, parallels the scientific method's emphasis on empirical observation and verification. They weren't asking people to believe. They were providing techniques for direct experience. Just as science relies on reproducible experiments, Gnostic practices were designed to produce consistent, verifiable expansions of consciousness. The implications are staggering. If these ancient mystics accurately described aspects of reality that science is only now discovering, what else might they have understood? Their texts speak of technologies of consciousness, methods for accessing higher dimensional information, and techniques for transcending the limitations of ordinary perception. This convergence of ancient wisdom and modern science points towards something revolutionary, a new understanding of consciousness as fundamental to reality, of human potential as far greater than we've imagined, and of the universe itself as far more mysterious, multi-dimensional and alive than we ever dared to dream. The question isn't whether these ancient texts contain valid insights about reality. The question is, are we ready to integrate their wisdom with our modern understanding to unlock capabilities we've forgotten we possess? The scientific parallels we explored show us that these ancient texts weren't just spiritual philosophy. They were practical manuals for consciousness transformation. But here's what matters most. How do you actually apply this wisdom in your daily life? The Gnostic texts reveal something revolutionary that modern spirituality often misses. You don't need to believe anything. You don't need faith, hope, or endless seeking. The divine spark isn't something you earn or find. It's what you already are. The Gospel of Thomas puts it bluntly. If you bring forth what is within you, what you have will save you. This isn't metaphor, it's instruction. Let me share what I've discovered through years of working with these practices. The contemplation method from Thomas works by breaking your mind's addiction to binary thinking. Take any belief that causes you suffering. Maybe I'm not successful enough, or the world is falling apart. Now hold its opposite simultaneously. I'm exactly where I need to be, and the world is transforming perfectly. Don't try to resolve the contradiction. Sit with both truths until something deeper emerges. This isn't positive thinking. It's training your consciousness to operate from the paradoxical wisdom that transcends ordinary mental categories. The Gospel of Philip offers something even more practical. Integration work. Philip understood that most people live fragmented lives. torn between competing desires and identities. The text describes making the two into one, not as abstract mysticism, but as concrete psychological healing. When you feel torn between your spiritual aspirations and material responsibilities, Philip's method involves recognizing both as expressions of the same divine creativity. The mystic and the practical person aren't separate selves fighting for control. They're complementary aspects of your complete being. Here's a specific technique I've adapted from Philip's teaching. When facing any major decision, ask yourself, how does this choice honor both my transcendent nature and my embodied humanity? The answer that satisfies both aspects simultaneously is usually the one that leads to genuine fulfillment, rather than spiritual bypassing or materialistic emptiness. The Secret Book of John provides perhaps the most crucial skill for modern life: recognizing archonic influence. Remember, the archons aren't literal demons. They're patterns of consciousness that keep you trapped in limitation and reactivity. John's text teaches discernment practices that are startlingly relevant today. When you feel suddenly anxious after scrolling social media, that's archonic influence, the artificial amplification of fear and comparison. When you find yourself compulsively buying things you don't need, that's the archons of desire hijacking your natural creativity. When you get pulled into political outrage that leaves you feeling powerless, you're experiencing what John called the counterfeit spirit, emotions that feel righteous but actually drain your life force. John's solution is elegant. Pause and ask, is this feeling expanding my consciousness or contracting it? Archonic influences always contract. They make you feel smaller, more separate, more afraid. Divine influences expand. They connect you to your deeper wisdom and natural compassion, even when addressing serious problems. If you're ready to go deeper into these practices, I've created additional resources that explore specific techniques from each gospel. But remember, the real teaching isn't in any external source. It's in your willingness to discover the divine spark that these ancient mystics knew was your true nature all along. The Nag Hammadi texts offer us something precious, not another belief system to adopt, but practical methods for awakening to what we already are. In our final section, we'll explore how this ancient wisdom points toward humanity's next evolutionary leap. We've journeyed through forbidden texts and recovered wisdom that was buried for nearly 2 millennia. From Thomas's revelation that the kingdom exists within you, to Philip's understanding of sacred union, from the secret John's exposure of cosmic deception, to Mary Magdalene's embodiment of divine wisdom and Sophia's mapping of universal consciousness. But here's what becomes crystal clear when you step back and see the complete picture. These aren't separate teachings competing for your attention. They're facets of a single revolutionary truth that changes everything. You are not a human being, having occasional spiritual experiences. You are a divine being, temporarily experiencing limitation. The same light that animated the historical Jesus flows through your consciousness right now. The same creative force that spins galaxies into existence beats within your heart. The same intelligence that orchestrates the dance of subatomic particles thinks your thoughts and dreams your dreams. This isn't metaphorical poetry or wishful thinking. The Gnostic texts present this as the fundamental structure of reality. When Thomas records Jesus saying, "Split a piece of wood, and I am there. Lift up a stone and you will find me there," he's pointing to something far more radical than pantheism. He's revealing that consciousness itself is the ground of being, and your individual awareness is a focal point of that infinite consciousness. Think about what this actually means for your daily life. That relationship challenge you're facing. You're not a limited person struggling with another limited person. Your divine intelligence temporarily forgetting its nature, interacting with another expression of that same divine intelligence. The creative project you're working on isn't you trying to make something from nothing. It's infinite creativity expressing itself through the unique lens of your experience. Your work, whatever it is, becomes a form of sacred service when you understand that you're not separate from the source of all value and meaning. You're not trying to prove your worth or find your purpose. You are worth itself, temporarily exploring what it means to create Kevi through human experience. You are purpose itself, investigating the infinite ways consciousness can express and know itself. But with this recognition comes profound responsibility. The Gnostics understood that awakening isn't just personal liberation, it's a cosmic event. Every person who remembers their true nature becomes a beacon for others still trapped in the illusion of separation. You become what the texts call a pneumatic, someone who carries the breath of divine consciousness into a world that has forgotten how to breathe. This is where the Gnostic vision becomes urgently relevant to our current global situation. Look around at the crises we're facing: environmental destruction, social division, economic inequality, mental health epidemics. These aren't separate problems requiring separate solutions. They're all symptoms of the same fundamental error: the belief that we are isolated beings competing for limited resources in a hostile universe. But what happens when enough people awaken to their true nature? What happens when a critical mass of humanity remembers that we are all expressions of the same divine consciousness? The competitive paradigm that drives destruction begins to dissolve. When you truly understand that harming another is harming yourself, exploitation becomes impossible. When you recognize that the earth isn't separate from your consciousness, environmental destruction becomes as unthinkable as deliberately poisoning your own blood. The ancient texts suggest we're living through exactly this kind of transformation right now. The discovery of the Nag Hammadi library itself, after being buried in the Egyptian desert for over 1600 years, coincided with humanity's emergence into the nuclear age. Just as we developed the power to destroy ourselves, we recovered the wisdom to transcend the consciousness that creates such power. Modern science is confirming what the Gnostics taught. Consciousness appears to be fundamental to reality, not an accidental byproduct of matter. Quantum physics reveals that observation affects reality at the most basic level. Neuroscience discovers that the brain doesn't create consciousness, but acts more like a receiver or focusing mechanism. The boundaries between observer and observed, between self and universe, prove to be far more fluid than classical materialism assumed. This convergence isn't coincidental. We're witnessing the integration of ancient wisdom and cutting-edge discovery, because consciousness is ready to know itself more completely. The same intelligence that guided the Gnostic teachers 2,000 years ago is orchestrating our current scientific breakthroughs. But knowledge without embodiment remains merely intellectual entertainment. The Gnostic path was never about accumulating esoteric information. It was about direct realization. Gnosis, the immediate recognition of your divine nature. This happens not through belief or study alone, but through the surrender of everything you think you are to discover what you actually are. When Jesus told his disciples, "Be passers-by," he wasn't advocating detachment from life. He was pointing to the freedom that comes from knowing yourself as the consciousness within which all experiences arise and pass away. You can engage fully with relationships, creativity, service, and even struggle, while knowing that your essential nature remains untouched by whatever appears in your experience. This is the Christ consciousness, not the exclusive property of one historical figure, but the natural state of awareness recognizing itself as the source and substance of all experience. When you embody this recognition, you become what the texts call a living Christ, divine consciousness, expressing itself through the unique configuration of your human experience. The implications stretch beyond personal transformation. If you are divine consciousness temporarily experiencing limitation, then every person you meet is the same consciousness, exploring itself through different circumstances. Every interaction becomes a meeting of the divine with itself. Service to others becomes self-love, expressed through apparent multiplicity. The healing of the world becomes the healing of your own consciousness, projected outward. This is why the Gnostic texts were suppressed, why they were sealed in jars and buried in desert sands, hidden for centuries, until the world was ready to understand. This knowledge doesn't just challenge religious institutions, it redefines the very foundation of human civilization. It reveals that the kingdom of heaven isn't a distant destination, but a present reality momentarily obscured by the illusion of separation. The invitation is simple yet profound. Stop seeking God, and recognize yourself as the divine awareness within which the seeking arises. Stop striving to become worthy of love, and remember you are love itself, momentarily playing at being separate. Stop searching for your purpose, and realize that you are purpose embodied, exploring infinite possibilities for expression and service. If this message resonated with you, share your reflection in the comments by writing, "I understood it."